Hey there, Internet. This is Half Man, Half Philosopher, here to dispel some of the head in the sand, ostrich degrading propaganda going on around the immigration and Islam debate in America. Although I would argue perhaps the propaganda is sort of more flexible than reaching just the sand. But let's pull our heads out of the fog. Sorry for the mixed metaphor, and get stuck into it here. First of all, it's not racist to be against Islam or to have questions about it, mainly because Islam isn't a race. Sorry, you should probably figure that one out. Islam is an ideology, and I would hesitate to even say it is only a religion, and the reason why is rather important. So, Islam also includes within it the edict that there has to be a dictatorial, authoritarian government under Sharia law. And actually, I just mean Sharia, that is the word for law. Kind of like you wouldn't say that communism is just an economic system, it's also an ideological system about tearing down what were the previous norms and creating this sort of a super egalitarian equality land. So, yes, Islam is a religion, but it is also fundamentally a political philosophy, as a political ideology. And that's kind of the reason why people, I think, get worried about, how Muslims act, is because within their ideology lies the edict that it must impose this form of government everywhere in the world on everybody. And yes, there may be Muslims who don't believe that. I'm sure there are many Muslims who don't, but there are also many who do, and we're in part going to be talking about that. So, before I really start the video proper, I do want to mention that I do think that we should help the Muslim refugees from Syria and elsewhere in the Middle East, particularly America, because I think that, America and the West in general, because we're largely responsible for their plight in many ways, having, gone and pretty much not only destroyed their towns, infrastructure, countries, maybe murdered their family if they're real lucky, but we also, in the case of Iraq at least, destroyed even their genetic legacy for the next billion years by using, depleted, internationally illegal depleted uranium munitions that are going to be irradiating their population for like a billion years. Good luck bringing a war crimes trial against the U.S. government for that one. Even the veterans who themselves were poisoned with it, which is most likely what Gulf War syndrome is. At any rate, yeah, I do believe that we should help them, and I believe in some way it's our duty to help them, and so we should look at what is the best way to help them. And as a matter of fact, a group called the Center for Immigration Research, I think? The Center for Immigration something. It's not very creatively named, and thus I have forgotten it. At any rate, the links to all my sources are below, and you can check it out there. But they did a study of how much it would cost to settle these immigrants in the United States versus the cost elsewhere. And now here's the interesting thing that you most likely haven't heard. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees has requested $1,057 per year to resettle a Syrian refugee in the surrounding countries like Lebanon or elsewhere, compared to the 5-year cost in America of $64,370. That's for 5 years. So let's take the $1,057 number, multiply that by 5, you're going to get about $5,250. Then you're going to, I guess, you could divide 64,370 by that 5,250, and you're going to get roughly 10 to 12 refugees that could be helped for the same cost in the Middle East as it would cost to bring them over to America. Another way to put that is you could help 61 refugees in the Middle East and resettle them there for a year, or you could bring one refugee to America who wins this crazy refugee lottery to get to America and support that person for 5 years. Now, I cannot for the life of me, assuming that it is possible to settle these refugees in the Middle East where they speak the language, they know the culture, they won't be imported to a culture that they really don't understand. They don't speak the language and most likely have few to no skills that are of any use to people in America, other than low-wage jobs where they will most likely become part of a permanent underclass of, relatively poor people because they can't really compete in America as well as they could in the Middle East for relevant jobs. So if you can tell me why it would be better to help less, like 12 times less refugees, to bring them, a small number of them, to America where they're going to be harshly disadvantaged and where it's going to cost an incredible amount of money, please let me know in the comment section or wherever else. The UN has reported that they have a gap of $2.5 billion for resettling the remainder of the approximately 4 million refugees from the Middle East. $2.5 billion, it's pretty much chump change for the federal government in America, so I say go for it. Give them $2.5 billion, we spent trillions of dollars totally annihilating their countries and their culture. Least we can do is, throw a few pennies at them and, resettle them all. We can afford to. I think it's probably the least we could do. Is this an irrational, racist plan? I mean, it's not racist, as I've already explained. Well, I guess in this case we are talking about refugees from that area. But is this really something crazy? I mean, the only benefit to bringing them here that I can understand is to score concern-trolling lefty points and being able to call conservatives racist for thinking maybe it's not a good idea. And by the way, I'm not a conservative. I'll leave my political leanings to your imagination until some other time. But I do think that politicians in America have been saying some pretty, not only completely inaccurate, but just kind of stupid things about the relationship of Islam and Muslims to terrorism and violence around the world, and the prevalence of such thoughts or ideological leanings. Roll the tape, Johnny.
Now let's make two things clear. ISIL is not Islamic. No religion condones the killing of innocents.
The 99.9% of Muslims who are looking for the same thing we're looking for.
Muslims are peaceful and tolerant people and have nothing whatsoever to do with terrorism.
The overwhelming majority of Muslims reject that interpretation of Islam. They don't even recognize it as being Islam.
The overwhelming majority of Muslims, the 99.9% of Muslims.
So is it true that it's just a tiny 0.00001% minority of Muslims who believe in anything that would be thought of as extreme in the West? Is it true that Islam has nothing to do with the Islamic State? Other than the name. That's all. Well, we actually know. So let's find out. Pew did they're very respected. They did a research survey or poll in the United States of U.S. Muslims. There's about 1.8 million Muslim adults in America right now, and there are about, with children and everything, it's like 2.75 million. So, in 2007, Pew did a poll in the West, anyways. They found that in Britain, they surveyed how many Muslims in these countries believe that suicide bombings can be justified against civilians, would be the implication, I assume. But Britain, 35%, just a tiny minority. France, 42%. And I will also add that 20% of people in France now support ISIS. Fucking ISIS. Tiny minority. In Germany, 22% supports suicide bombing. In Spain, 29% supports suicide bombing. And in America, 26% of Muslims said they could support suicide bombing. And now, but I will cut some slack for this particular statistic because even I could imagine maybe sometime when I could say, well, I guess a suicide bombing was justified. Personally, I would find it a stupid and ineffective means of accomplishing my goal, but I could maybe think of a situation. I'll just use the example of some kind of like alien attack, and I'm in some kind of oppressive situation, and I'm gonna try and make some political statement by doing suicide bombing. I think Buddhists were better when they set themselves on fire and without killing civilians, or Christians for doing similar suicidal things. A little more masochistic than Islam, maybe. Anyways, here's some other interesting statistics on the matter. The Center for Security Policy in 2015 conducted funded, I forgot what the word is, another poll for American Muslims. And I found this to be actually quite shocking. Yeah, so they found that the percentage that would support violence against Americans in support of global jihad was 25%. I'll just let you stew on that. 25% of, about 2 million. So about 500,000 Muslims in America would support violence against Americans in support of global jihad. Let's see. Tiny minority. In 2015, over half, 51% of Muslims said that they should be able to choose to be ruled under Sharia law rather than American law. Now, that includes such non-extreme beliefs as stoning your wife if she cheats on you, cutting someone's hand off for stealing if you find that to be at all brutal. Forget the death penalty. Let's try. Is it bad to do stoning? Is it bad to cut off people's hands for petty offenses? Honor killings, where if there's some kind of adultery, then you can murder your wife. Or no, wait, I think that's the one where if they get raped, then you can murder them. So feminists, anytime you want to jump on the maybe it's not a great idea to import a ton of Islam into your culture, go for it. And I'm not saying all Muslims believe this. I'm telling you exactly how many appear to believe this, which is a shocking number. I'm sorry that this is true. I'm sorry if facts are offensive, but this is how it is. Almost a quarter of those surveyed believe that it is legitimate to use violence to punish those who give offense to Islam or Muslims. For example, by drawing pictures of Muhammad. So if you think that might be a little bit antithetical to Western liberal values like freedom of speech, killing people who give you offense, I'm sure maybe SJWs can get on board with that, but the rest of us are not too interested in that kind of draconian punishment for your feelings. And almost a fifth of the Muslim respondents said that the use of violence in the U.S. is justified in order to make Sharia the law of the land. So if you find Sharia to be maybe a little bit extreme, then you might find that it is more than a tiny minority of Muslims who have what you would consider to be rather extreme views. So what should be done about this? What should we think about this? I first want to mention that, why do the Muslims want to come here? Why do they want to come to America and the West? Why won't the countries around them accept them? I'll tell you why. It's because they think they're a security threat and because they want to maintain their own cultural integrity, unlike the West, which is basically just slitting its own throat and, bleeding out all over the geopolitics or whatever. I don't know why. For some reason, the West has just given up on maintaining its culture in some sort of great leap forward into political correctness. The reason why is because when the chips are down and they're desperate in the Middle East, they know which way is better. They know whether it's better to have dictatorial authoritarian governments that totally stifle all your rights. They know that in the West, we have abundance because we have freedom. They know that it's better in the West. So the question is, why haven't they done this in their country? The West did it. We provided a perfect roadmap for how to do it. But people in the Middle East, you know, in the West, we were willing to die for it. Lots of millions of our ancestors were willing to die to have freedom and to fight for these things, through the Reformation, the Enlightenment, and even before that. But Muslims have not been willing to do that. And does that mean we should punish all of them now? Of course not. Of course not. I think that we should help them, as I already mentioned. But on the other hand, I think that we should push them to do this in their own country rather than allowing them to just jump into the West without paying the blood price that the West did. And as we can see, a lot of them are not assimilating to our culture and wanting these freedoms. They just think that they can come here and support the exact kind of policies and ideas that have kept them in the relative dark ages for the last 300 years, in where the West has been advancing exponentially. So the other issue is, I think that we can take refugees. I don't think price-wise makes any sense, but I think we should take immigrants just in general, and you have to do that in a slow process. You can't just have a giant, mass immigration wave. And I know that's not what's being proposed in America, but it is what's happening in a lot of Europe and Sweden, and for example, and that's dangerous because then they can form these pockets of sort of their own culture where they don't try to assimilate to the native culture, and they just basically become radicalized groups that want to overthrow the governments that they came and basically mooched off of for several years. So you can do it. You can do it gradually, but the reason why immigration worked in the United States for so long was because it was people who were relatively culturally similar, and they were all invested in becoming Americans, not in their own culture, and they tried hard to do that. Muslims, there's a lot of evidence to say they are not very invested in doing that. So when you hear people saying, if you come to America, you should speak English, well, I think that's a little bit short-sighted, but there's a reason for that kind of thing. You have to speak English to be involved in the economic life of your country and start to assimilate, and so I think that's reasonable kind of ideas, You can have lots of immigrants, but they have to want to assimilate and be kind of similar to you, The original Star Wars movies were all pretty similar and awesome, so you could have all three in one program, and it's no big deal. It's like just the right amount of Star Wars. But when it comes to cultures, it just doesn't work that way. It's a little more difficult, and you have to be really careful, and you have to control it. You can't just willy-nilly let millions of people into your country who aren't invested in becoming American. And as to the vetting process, I'll finally, imagine you're doing this vetting process. The country that this person is from has been totally destroyed. They come in with a fucking broken Etch-a-Sketch that says, I'm totally okay. I like America. Where are they going to get the papers? How are you going to find their, references? How are you going to find their address? Where are you going to verify all this stuff? It's impossible. Like I said in my last video, the government can't keep drugs out of a prison. It can't keep reporters out of the scene of an apartment crime scene of terrorists who just attacked in America. And by the way, one of whom came here on a fiance visa where she identified an address that she came from that doesn't even exist. Great vetting there, American government. How do you, do you think it's easy maybe to bribe the, officials in these countries to get you a passport or, some kind of valid identification? Bribery and corruption is a pretty big thing even when a country hasn't been completely obliterated. How exactly do you think we're going to vet these people? And then, finally, to be honest, if we're going to import terrorists to scare us into giving away our liberties, the CIA will probably just do it through 50 USC 3508. That's 50 US Code 3508, which basically says they can just import for any reason any immigrant that they deem necessary for, national security, the blanket, we can do whatever we want card for the government. But there's still a chance that they could accidentally import some pretty angry, justifiably angry people in this new bid for concern trolling from the refugees. So, I hope that was enlightening, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, share, and comment if you did enjoy it, and have a great day.